I really like these template router bits. They've got a bearing on the bottom, so you can cut out a template and then use this to make copies of that template. So it's great if you're making a lot of identical parts, and it's also great if you're using really expensive material, because you can make all of your mistakes on a cheap piece and then use that cheap piece as your template to cut your expensive material. But I work with metal as well, and as far as I know, there's no metalworking equivalent of this. And I really miss that. Currently, when I need to make an odd-shaped part like this, I'll just draw a line onto the part, and then I'll use my belt grinder to grind that out, freehand. So I think I'm going to try to make a wheel like this that fits in my small wheel holder, but has a bearing on it that acts as a guide, just like the bearing on these router bits. The material I'm starting with is 1-inch round mild steel, and this is going to get turned down to a little bit smaller than the diameter of my guide bearing because it needs to account for the thickness of the belt. Getting really close. Obviously the thickness of a belt can vary quite a bit, but the ones I use most commonly are about 40 thousandths in thickness, so I'm making this wheel 80 thousandths smaller than the bearing. Great, that's down to exactly the right diameter. This is a standard small wheel that I bought online, so what I'm trying to create on this end is going to be exactly the same as this. The part I'm turning here is just going to be a shoulder that keeps the bearing from sliding all the way on, so that's going to be 7/16 diameter, and now this part is going to be a press fit with the bearing, just over 3/8. I may have overshot the desired press fit. That looks like it's pretty much exactly 0.375. I'm just going to go ahead and finish this wheel, and if that turns out to be too loose, I'll just have to start over and call this one practice. To be sure the wheel will run perfectly true, I'm not backing off the live center or rechucking it or anything. It's all turned from one position. On the right we have that spot that will hold the right wheel bearing, and here I'm turning a spot that will hold the left wheel bearing and the follower bearing. A word of advice if you're thinking about trying to make one of these yourself, start with a piece of steel that's longer than 4 inches. I'm really cramped on space here. From this perspective you can see I left a tiny little shoulder that'll keep the follower bearing from rubbing against the side of the wheel. One of the bearings is going to sit right here. The other bearing is going to sit right over here. I turned these just a little oversized using the lathe and then slowly crept up on the fit using a file. Since I started with a piece that was really a little too short, I didn't have enough room to actually saw this end off, so I just turned it off. Alright, we're all done with this part. Now's the moment of truth to see if I made this too small. Well, I can't pull it back off by hand, so I'm calling that a success. And I'm using the lathe again to press the follower bearing into place. Okay, we're almost done, but before I fit this wheel bearing, I want to make a spacer that goes in here. This is a nice tight press fit, I know, because I slid this one over it, but it just seems better to have a spacer between them to be sure that this bearing can't slide on too far. The bushing is extremely simple. It's just a piece of 1/2 inch round, trued up and faced off with a 3/8 hole through it. Now we can press that other wheel bearing on, and with that, the wheel is done. By now you've most likely noticed that this wheel is wider than standard. That's so that I can use thicker templates, and I'll talk about why you'd want to use thicker templates later. Right now I'm going to get started making a spacer that'll widen out this small wheel holder. My template following wheel is exactly a 1/2 inch wider than the standard wheel, so I'm making this spacer out of 1/2 inch square bar. To install the spacer, you just have to remove one of the holder sides from the small wheel holder. It can be either side. And you'll need to replace the bolts with some longer ones. The spacer should fit just like this. And now I can install my custom-made wheel. Here you can see how the belt and the bearing line up. Obviously different belts come in different thicknesses.
This belt is only 16 thousandths, while this one is 52 thousandths.
I'm not really after super precise parts. I don't think this is gonna do that good at that anyway, but it will make good looking parts very easily, even if you need big batches of them. If I ever in the future need more precision, I can make more of these wheels, each with a little different diameter, to work with different belts. And these are super easy and cheap to make. Here's a template I made just to test this out. It's got a couple of subtle curves to it, which are kind of hard to get right freehand. I just rough cut the steel using a hacksaw, and since it has a couple of holes in it, I can bolt it on. That's the most convenient way to mount templates, but you could also get creative with clamping or use double-sided tape. Let's give it a try. Now I have it all roughly ground out, and you can see how much it wore the belt. This is why you want to be able to run a relatively thick template, because you can raise the table up and find a new spot on the belt to finish the part. Here's what the final result looks like. It is a surprisingly smooth finish. I did deburr the part so I wouldn't cut myself, but other than that, this is straight off the belt grinder, and that was a 120 grit belt. I'll be interested to hear what you think. Thanks for watching.